My name is Natalie Carter. At my brother's wedding, my father lifted his glass and laughed. Here's the biggest screw-up in our family. The room burst out laughing, just like they always did. I sat there, quiet, pretending it didn't hurt. But inside, I knew the truth. I wasn't the failure he wanted me to be. I had spent years proving myself on battlefields he would never understand. He called me a screw-up. The world calls me Admiral. Before I share what happened next, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. And if this is your first time here, please hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next story. Now, let me tell you how it all started. The hall smelled like brisket and buttercream, the kind of mix only a Texas wedding can brew. Fairy lights draped across the rafters, glowing soft against the wood-paneled walls. Guests leaned back in folding chairs, barbecue sauce still clinging to their plates, their laughter buzzing like static in my ears. I sat at one of the long tables near the center, hands folded neatly in my lap, pretending I was invisible. Pretending his words hadn't just carved another wound across my chest. My father stood tall at the head of the room, his glass raised high, his smile wide and proud. He didn't need a microphone. Years of shouting from the sidelines of Friday night football had given his voice the weight of authority. When Richard Carter spoke, the room always listened. He knew it. He enjoyed it. And tonight, he was in his element. He had already boomed praises for my brother, Michael. From quarterback to businessman, still making his old man proud. The applause was thunderous, his old teammates in bolo ties whistling as if the game-winning touchdown had just been scored. Then he turned to my sister, Emily. Smart, beautiful, and married into one of the finest families in town. The crowd murmured in approval. Her cheeks flushed pink as she angled her bouquet modestly toward the floor. And then his eyes found me. I knew what was coming before he opened his mouth. I felt it in my gut the way you sense lightning before it cracks the sky. He grinned, savoring the pause, and then delivered the line that had already sliced through me once tonight. And this one, bless her heart, the biggest screw-up in our family. His voice carried across the hall, crisp and merciless. The laughter that followed rattled against the silverware and burned against my skin. I didn't move. I didn't correct him. I had learned long ago that to fight back only gave him more fuel. He thrived on reactions. He liked the way my embarrassment fed the room. So I kept my face still, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the rim of my glass. Silence was my shield, but silence cut too. He wasn't done. He never was. My father loved building momentum, loved stoking the crowd until they roared. Y'all remember her track tryout? He said, his voice booming. First hurdle, bam, flat on her face, finished dead last. We called it the Carter family highlight reel. He pantomimed the fall, jerking his body forward for dramatic effect. The crowd doubled over, pounding tables, whistling. I could feel the air shift around me. A cousin buried her face behind her hand to hide her laughter. An old family friend shook his head, chuckling. That girl never did figure herself out. The deacon's wife shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting from me to her plate, as if even looking at me might be considered pity. My mother sat rigid 2 tables away, her hands clasped tight in her lap, her smile thin and strained. She had worn that same look for years, the one that said she didn't approve but wouldn't interrupt. Margaret Carter never interrupted. She believed in keeping peace at the cost of her own voice, and I had inherited that silence for far too long. I pressed my palms flat against the table, grounding myself against the cool wood beneath the white cloth. My fingers trembled just slightly, hidden from view, as the laughter rolled over me. The familiar humiliation washed across my skin, old scars splitting open as if time had folded back on itself. I was 13 again, holding a science project wired with flickering lights while he tapped the board and muttered, "That's fine, honey, but you'll never beat your brother's trophies." I was 15, overhearing him tell a neighbor, "She'll figure it out someday." Or not. I was 17 hearing him joke to his friends that sending me off to college would be a waste of good money. But this time he added something new, something sharper. Richard Carter tilted his head, voice dripping with that same smug charm he always used when he believed he was being clever. You know, if Natalie had half the discipline of Ryan Mitchell, she might have been something. The name struck like a slap. Ryan Mitchell, the son of his old coaching buddy, a rising officer in the Air Force recently written up in the local paper for his commendations. The crowd nodded approvingly, murmuring his name. Ryan had become my father's golden example of what discipline and grit looked like, what he wished his daughter had been. It wasn't enough that he mocked me with my own failures. Now he raised another man's son above me, holding him out as proof that I was less. The laughter softened to whispers now, more pity than humor. And that stung even worse. People laughed at you when they believed you could take it. Pity meant they'd written you off completely. I let the noise fade, staring down into my glass of cheap wine. The surface trembled with the bass of their laughter, tiny ripples across dark liquid. And in that moment, I made a decision. Not for the first time, but deeper, stronger than ever before. I would not give him the victory of seeing me break. I had learned to carry pain the way I carried weight in the Navy, close to my chest, tight, controlled until it made me stronger. I would sit still, let him have his stage, let them all clap and laugh and whisper, because I knew something they didn't, something he couldn't take from me. I knew the stars I had earned, the ones not pinned to my dress tonight, but etched into my very bones. I raised my glass, just enough to touch it to my lips, not to drink, but to steady my hand. Across the room, my mother's eyes found mine. There was a flicker there, a flash of something unspoken. Not pride, not yet, but apology, permission, prayer. I gave the smallest nod, just enough to let her know I was all right. For now, because this night was not over. And neither was I. I grew up in the shadow of other people's applause. In our house, pride was measured in trophies, grade reports, and how loud the town clapped for you on Friday nights. My brother Michael was the golden boy, quarterback turned local legend. My sister Emily was the darling, straight A's and Sunday school perfection. And me? I was the entertainment, the family's built-in joke. At every Thanksgiving table, my father carved the turkey with one hand and carved me apart with the other. "This one," he'd say, nodding toward me with a grin, still trying to figure it out. Bless her heart. The family chuckled like it was tradition, like mashed potatoes and pumpkin pie. My cheeks burned hotter than the oven, but I forced a smile because that was easier than crying. I can still see the scene. Michael's football trophies lined up on the mantel, polished so bright you could see your reflection. Emily's certificates framed neatly down the hallway. Each one hung like proof she was everything a Carter child was supposed to be. And then there was me. My projects stuffed into drawers. My drawings curled at the corners. Forgotten. It wasn't just at home. My father had a gift for making sure the world laughed with him. Once, in 8th grade, I worked for weeks on a science fair project. Carefully wired circuits that lit bulbs in sequence, a little board of blinking lights I was proud of. I remember carrying it into the kitchen, heart pounding, ready for him to say, "Good job, Natalie." He glanced at it, tapped the board with his finger, and said, "That's fine, honey, but it'll never beat your brother's trophies." He didn't even look up again. I carried that board back to my room, the bulbs flickering like my hope, and sat on the edge of my bed, whispering, "One day I'll build something brighter than any stadium light you've ever cheered under." Another time at parent-teacher night, I overheard him telling one of my teachers, "She's not like Emily. Not disciplined, not like Ryan Mitchell." I froze when I heard that name. Ryan Mitchell, his best friend's son, a year older than me, already an ROTC, the kind of kid who made adults nod with approval. "That boy's going somewhere," Dad said proudly. "Wish Natalie had half his focus." My teacher didn't argue. She just smiled politely. But me? I wanted to disappear through the floor. The sting wasn't just in the words. It was in how easily people believed him. Once my father decided I was the screw-up, it didn't matter what I did. The story was written and the town bought it. At home, I learned to laugh along. When he told stories of me tripping on hurdles, I chuckled with everyone else. When he joked about how I could never keep my room clean, I rolled my eyes like it was all good fun. But at night, in the dark, lying under the slow churn of the ceiling fan, I whispered promises to myself. I won't be the joke forever. I won't be the screw-up he thinks I am. I'll find my own way, even if no one believes me. It was a strange kind of love, the kind children can't stop feeling for the parent who wounds them. I wanted his approval more than I wanted air, and every laugh he won at my expense was another breath stolen from me. The comparisons never stopped. My father was a coach by trade and a competitor by nature. To him, life was always about winners and losers, and I was the latter. Ryan Mitchell's already got his pilot's license. Michael threw 4 touchdowns last Friday night. Emily just got another scholarship offer. And then, Natalie. Well, bless her heart, she's still figuring it out. He thought he was being funny, but every time he said it, I felt smaller, like he was chiseling me down into something that barely existed. I wanted to scream at him. I'm trying. Can't you see I'm trying? But the words never came. Silence was safer. What no one saw were the mornings I got up before the sun, lacing my sneakers in the dark, running until my lungs burned, not for a team, not for a coach, but for myself. No one saw me sneaking into the library to check out books on naval history, reading about admirals and battles while other girls flipped through fashion magazines. No one saw the push-ups I forced my body through until my arms trembled, or the way I studied maps as if they held a secret path out of my father's shadow. Through it all, my mother saw more than she let on. Margaret Carter didn't speak against my father in public. She believed in peace above all else, but her eyes sometimes betrayed her. When Dad turned me into the punchline at dinner, her lips pressed into a thin line. When I slipped out early in the morning to run, she sometimes left a banana on the counter with a Post-it note that said simply, "Proud of you." It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that someone saw me. Someone believed, even if she didn't say it aloud. I didn't know then exactly where all this would lead me. I only knew I couldn't stay in that role forever. I couldn't be the permanent joke of the Carter family. Each laugh became kindling, each insult, another match. I carried the fire quietly, letting it smolder in silence, waiting for the day I could turn it into something bigger. And that fire, it would eventually lead me to the one place my father least expected, the Navy. Every Thanksgiving was a stage, and my father was the star. He'd sit at the head of the table, carving the turkey with his coach's authority, the knife glinting under the dining room lights. Michael's trophies were always within sight, polished and displayed where guests couldn't miss them. Emily's certificates, too, framed on the wall by the kitchen doorway. And then there was me, sitting with my hands folded, waiting for the moment when his eyes would land on me. He'd smile, sip his sweet tea, and say, "And here's Natalie. Bless her heart. Still figuring it out." The room would laugh politely as if it were part of the prayer before the meal. My cheeks would flush, but I learned to laugh too. It was survival. Laugh with them, and maybe the shame would sting less. But in the quiet of my bedroom later, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles above me, I'd whisper, "One day, I'll show you. One day, I'll prove you wrong." I remember one Sunday afternoon clearer than most. Church had just let out, and families gathered outside, chatting while kids chased each other around the parking lot. I had been part of a school play the night before. A small role, but I'd worked hard. One of the women from church told my father, "Natalie did so well last night. She really lit up the stage." And my father, he laughed, clapped me on the back, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, she's good at pretending. Maybe she'll figure something real out someday." The group chuckled awkwardly. My smile cracked, but I held it. I held it because crying there, in front of everyone, would have only proved him right. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, script still in my lap, and swore I would never give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. By high school, Ryan Mitchell had become the measuring stick my father used to cut me down. Ryan was disciplined. Ryan was focused. Ryan was what a son, or even a daughter, should be. Ryan's already got his ROTC jacket. Ryan's flying lessons are paying off. Ryan's parents must be so proud. And then he'd look at me. Just a glance, but it said everything. Why can't you be more like him? It wasn't just cruel. It was public. At family barbecues, he'd brag about Ryan while I stood right there, holding paper plates or pouring sweet tea for guests. Each time, the crowd nodded, agreeing with him. They didn't even notice how small I shrank in those moments. No one knew what I did when the lights were off. They didn't see me waking before dawn, running laps around the football field while the world still slept. They didn't see me drop to the ground for push-ups until my arms trembled and my breath came in gasps. They didn't see the books I checked out from the library. Naval history, biographies of admirals, stories of battles fought and won on seas far from our small Texas town. I kept notebooks filled with sketches of ships, notes about strategies, quotes from leaders who commanded respect with presence, not with volume. I studied them like Holy Scripture. I wanted to learn what it took to stand tall without needing to shout. Sometimes, in the mirror, I practiced keeping my face still, steady no matter what words were thrown at me. I didn't realize then that I was training myself for the Navy. I just knew I had to be ready for the moment life demanded more of me. The worst came during Michael's senior year. The school held a banquet to honor athletes, and my whole family sat at one of the long tables near the front. Michael, of course, was the star. His coach praised him, the town applauded him, and my father glowed like it was his own award. When dessert came, someone asked Dad how I was doing. He laughed, shook his head, and said, "Natalie? She's got a heart. I'll give her that." But she couldn't follow through on a plan if her life depended on it. Always starting, never finishing. The table roared. I sat frozen, fork halfway to my mouth, the cheesecake sour on my tongue. Michael winced, glancing at me, but he didn't say a word. Emily looked down at her napkin. Mom's hand tightened on her glass of water. And me? I swallowed hard and smiled, because that's what I always did. But inside, I broke. Not in a way he could see, not in a way anyone else noticed. I broke in silence, and in that silence, something new was born. A steel thread, thin at first, weaving itself into my spine. Through all of it, my mother was the only one who gave me fragments of hope. She never challenged my father outright. She believed in avoiding conflict. But she found small ways to let me know she saw me. When I came home sweaty from an early run, there'd be a banana on the counter and a note that read, "Keep going." When I brought home a good grade, she'd press it to the fridge with a magnet, even if Dad never looked at it. Once, after a particularly cruel joke at a church potluck, I found a note slipped into my backpack. It was just one line. "The world is bigger than this town." It was written in her careful script, folded neatly. I kept it for years, tucked into the back of my notebook. By the time I was 17, I had learned the art of silence. I let the names stick. Screw up, clumsy, lost cause. Outwardly, I smiled. Inwardly, I sharpened each word into a blade. I whispered promises to myself as I ran, as I pushed through push-ups, as I turned the pages of those naval history books. One day, I will not be the joke. One day, I will be more than the girl who tripped on hurdles. One day, I'll stand so tall the world will have no choice but to see me. I didn't know exactly how, but I knew where my path was leading. The Navy wasn't just an escape. It was the forge. And I was ready to step into the fire. So I waited. I trained. I planned. Every laugh, every insult, every careless word from my father was a reminder of who he thought I was, and a reason to become someone he could never imagine. By the time graduation came, my classmates were filling out college applications, deciding on majors, dreaming small-town dreams. I kept my plans to myself. I let them all think I was still lost, still figuring it out. But deep down, I knew. The screw-up had found her compass, and it pointed straight to the Navy. When I first stepped onto the training grounds of boot camp, it didn't feel like a new chapter. It felt like punishment. The air was heavy with sweat, dust, and the sharp bark of drill sergeants. The first morning, before the sun even broke the horizon, we were already running miles with full packs strapped to our backs. My body screamed, but what hurt more was the echo of my father's words. Biggest screw-up in the family. It replayed in my head with every pounding step of my boots against the dirt. I wasn't just another recruit trying to make it through. I was trying to outrun years of being the family's shame. Every obstacle felt personal. When they ordered us to crawl through the mud under barbed wire, I could almost hear my father laughing at the sight of me, waiting for me to quit. When I dragged myself across the ground, mud filling my mouth, I bit down hard and whispered, "Not this time." The training broke people down on purpose. I watched strong men vomit after runs, women cry silently in their bunks at night, and more than a few pack up and leave. And I won't lie, I almost joined them. One night, after a brutal day of drills, I sat on my bunk with my hands trembling. My knees were raw, my back ached, and my lungs burned like fire. I thought about walking away, about proving my father right one more time. But then something small happened that shifted everything. One of the other recruits, a guy named Jackson, sat next to me and said quietly, "Don't let them win." I looked at him, confused, and he added, "Whoever told you couldn't? Don't let them win." He didn't know my story, but those words lit something in me. Because it wasn't the drill sergeants I was fighting against. It was my father's voice, my family's laughter, the weight of their rejection. The next day, I ran harder. I pushed myself until my legs felt like they'd give out, but I kept going. I stumbled during weapons training, my arms shaking from the recoil, but I stayed on the line until I hit my mark. Every time I wanted to stop, I told myself, he doesn't get to be right about me. One morning, in the middle of a grueling march, I collapsed. My body just shut down. For a moment, lying in the dirt, I thought, this is it. I'm done. The sergeant shouted at me to get up, his voice booming, but all I heard was my father saying, I knew she'd fail. And then, almost like instinct, I clenched my fists, dug my elbows into the ground, and forced myself to rise. I wasn't strong, I wasn't fast, but I refused to stay down. And when I stood, I saw something shift in the eyes of the people around me. They saw I wasn't quitting. Boot camp didn't just change my body, it changed my heart. The girl who walked in with her father's laughter haunting her had started to turn into a woman who carried fire in her chest. Every blister, every bruise, every scar was proof that I was stronger than the name he gave me. I was building a new one for myself. By the time we finished those first weeks, I realized something. My father's voice would always be in my head, but it no longer had the same power. Because now, when he said screw up, I could answer back in silence, with grit, sweat, and the certainty that I was becoming someone he couldn't ignore forever. Graduating from boot camp wasn't the finish line. It was just the start. We were soldiers now, but paper soldiers, shiny on the outside, untested where it mattered. That first deployment stripped away any illusions I had about what service really meant. We landed in a desert so hot the air burned my lungs when I breathed. Sand stretched endlessly, swallowing sound and color until the world felt like nothing but heat and silence. At night, the silence broke with gunfire that felt too close, explosions that rattled my chest, and orders shouted in the dark. That was when I learned the difference between training and reality. Out here, mistakes didn't mean push-ups. They meant body bags. On my first mission, we were ordered to escort a convoy through hostile territory. I gripped my rifle so tight my hands went numb, but my mind wasn't on the weapon. It was on my father's voice, mocking me. She'll fold the second things get real. That voice nearly drowned out everything until I forced myself to focus on the here and now. I couldn't afford distraction. The road stretched like a scar through the desert, and every shadow felt like a threat. We rolled slow, alert, and then chaos. An IED exploded ahead of us, sending shockwaves through the ground. Dust and screams filled the air. My ears rang, my chest heaved, but training kicked in. We scrambled, securing the area, returning fire at figures I could barely see through the haze. I froze for a split second when a man fell near me, blood soaking his uniform. It wasn't like training dummies or simulations. This was real. His breath rattled, his eyes wide with panic. For a heartbeat, I thought about running. But then I heard myself shouting, louder than I thought I could. "Medic! Get to him now!" My voice cut through the chaos, and the medic ran in. I stayed crouched, covering them, bullets kicking up dirt around us. My hands shook, but I didn't move. Afterward, back at base, I sat on my cot in the dim light, hands still trembling. I'd faced fear before. Fear of humiliation, fear of being unloved. But this was different. This was fear that hollowed you out, that reminded you life could end in seconds. And yet, in the middle of it, I hadn't quit. I had stayed. That mattered. Still, the doubts crept in. One night, I wrote a letter I never sent. "Dad, today I didn't fail. I didn't run. You'll never know it, but out there, I proved you wrong." I folded it up, shoved it deep in my pack, and carried it like a secret shield. Combat changed me, but it also scarred me. The sound of explosions stuck in my chest long after they faded. I dreamed of dust and blood. I woke in the dark, heart racing, the echo of my father's laughter twisting with the gunfire in my head. Some of the others drank to forget. Some shut down. Me? I pushed harder. If I let fear take me, it meant my father's words were right, and I refused to give him that victory. On a later mission, I had to lead a small unit through a search and clear. The responsibility weighed heavier than my gear. These weren't faceless recruits anymore. These were people who looked at me for direction, who would live or die by my choices. I remember pausing in the doorway of a ruined house, hearing the faint shuffle of movement inside. My chest tightened. One wrong call and it could all be over. I whispered, "Stay close. Follow my lead." And for the first time, I realized my voice didn't shake. They followed me, trusting me, and we cleared the space without losing anyone. When we stepped back into the sunlight, I caught one of the guys, Rodriguez, give me a quick nod. No words, just a nod. It said everything. That was the moment I began to believe I wasn't the screw-up he painted me as. I wasn't just surviving. I was leading. Out there, under fire, my father's laughter grew fainter. The world was starting to call me something else. Capable. Strong. A soldier who could be counted on. And even if my family never saw it, I knew one day they would. War tested me in ways I never imagined. The firefights, the sleepless nights, the constant hum of danger. They carved me into something harder, sharper. By the end of that first deployment, I wasn't the same girl who'd once cried in silence at family dinners. I had led missions. I had saved lives. I had watched friends come home in coffins. That kind of fire either destroys you or forges you. For me, it was both. When we returned stateside, our unit was called into formation on the parade field. I still remember the smell of the grass, the sun heavy on my shoulders, the sound of boots striking in unison. The commander called my name. For exemplary leadership under fire, Petty Officer Natalie Carter is awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal. The medal felt heavy in my hands, but not as heavy as the moment itself. My unit clapped, some slapped my back, and for the first time, I believed I had earned more than just survival. I had earned respect. In that instant, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Not pride exactly. Something deeper. Validation. Proof that all the pain, all the fear, had meant something. I wanted to share it with my family. Maybe, finally, they'd see me differently. I called home that night. My mom answered, her voice distant, distracted. "Oh, Natalie, that's nice. But your brother just got promoted to junior partner at the firm. We're having a dinner for him this weekend." Her words cut sharper than any shrapnel. I stood there in my barracks room, medal still in my hand, listening to her talk about his achievements. her laughter filling the silence I wanted so badly to share with her. She never asked what the medal was for. She didn't want to know. A few days later, I drove home on leave, medal tucked carefully in my pocket. At dinner, I pulled it out, setting it on the table like proof of my worth. My father barely looked up from his glass. "A little ribbon doesn't change who you are," he said flatly. My brother smirked, swirling his wine. "Congrats, sis. Maybe someday you'll make it into the family newsletter." The table laughed. My chest burned, but I swallowed it. Because what could I say? That while they sipped wine, I was dragging wounded men out of gunfire? That every night I wondered if I'd see the sunrise again? Their laughter made my medal feel like tin. But the betrayal wasn't just silence or mockery. It was worse. At a family gathering weeks later, I overheard my father talking to a group of relatives. "Natalie's just playing soldier. She'll never be more than a disappointment. The military's a place for people who couldn't cut it elsewhere." He said it with a chuckle, as though my service, my sacrifice, was a punchline. I stood frozen in the hallway, his words cutting deeper than bullets ever had. Out there, among my unit, I was respected, even relied upon. At home, I was nothing but a joke. The two worlds clashed inside me, tearing me apart. That night, lying awake in my old room, I clenched the metal in my hand until the edges dug into my skin. I thought about the men I'd led, the fear I'd fought through, the nods of trust I'd earned in the desert. And then I thought about my father's smirk, my brother's laughter, my mother's silence. I realized something. They weren't capable of seeing me for who I was. They didn't want to. To them, my failures made better stories than my victories. And if I kept looking for their approval, I'd be trapped forever in their shadow. So I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't fight for their recognition anymore. I would fight for my own. For my unit. For the people who looked at me and saw more than a screw-up. But that decision came at a cost. The more the military respected me, the more my family distanced themselves. The divide grew into a canyon, one I wasn't sure could ever be crossed. And deep down, a part of me still wanted their approval, no matter how much I pretended otherwise. Because it's one thing to face bullets on the battlefield. It's another to face the rejection of the people who are supposed to love you. And in some ways, that wound cut the deepest. After that night, something in me shifted. I stopped waiting for my father's nod, my mother's approval, or my brother's applause. Their rejection had carved a wound so deep I thought it would swallow me, but instead, it became the soil where something else began to grow. Every morning, I laced up my boots and stared at myself in the mirror. The face staring back wasn't the girl who used to cry into her pillow after family dinners. It wasn't the girl who flinched when her father's words hit like fists. No, this was someone harder. Someone who'd learned that the world doesn't hand out validation. You take it, you earn it, and sometimes you do it with blood on your hands. I poured myself into training. I volunteered for the toughest assignments, the missions nobody wanted. Jungle humidity, desert heat, freezing seas, I embraced them all. Each challenge felt like a hammer against the weak parts of me, pounding them into something unbreakable. My fellow sailors started looking at me differently. Not as Carter, the one who always has something to prove, but as Carter, the one who gets it done. But late at night, when the noise died down, the silence crept back in. That's when the old doubts whispered. Maybe Dad's right. Maybe I'll never be more than the family screw-up. I hated that voice, but I couldn't silence it. So instead, I used it. Every time it whispered, I pushed harder. Every insult I'd ever endured became fuel. One mission stands out in my memory. We were assigned to escort supply convoys through a hostile region. Ambushes were common, and morale was low. My unit looked tired, beaten. One night, I stood in front of them and said, "I know what it feels like to be underestimated, to have people laugh in your face and say you're not enough. But I promise you this, if we move together, no one out there can break us. Not tonight. Not ever." They believed me. And more importantly, I believed myself. That was the night I realized leadership wasn't about medals or speeches. It was about standing tall when others couldn't, about turning your scars into shields for the people beside you. Still, every victory carried a bitter aftertaste. I'd return from missions with commendations, letters of praise, even handwritten notes from commanding officers. Yet when I mailed them home or brought them to family gatherings, the reaction was always the same. A shrug, a smirk, a quick change of subject. My father once said, "Anyone can wear a uniform. Real success is measured in boardrooms, not battlefields." I wanted to scream, to tell him the battlefield had more honor than any boardroom ever would. But I didn't. Instead, I clenched my jaw and stored the anger deep inside, letting it become a silent vow. One day, I'd stand in a place where his words couldn't touch me. One day, I'd rise so high that even his laughter would choke in his throat. The seeds of transformation weren't glamorous. They were planted in quiet moments. Sweat dripping onto the training mats, salt water stinging my eyes during midnight swims, the weight of gear cutting into my shoulders as I pushed through another mile. They were watered by rejection, hardened by silence, and sharpened by mockery. And though my family still saw a failure, the Navy was shaping me into something else. Every scar, every sleepless night, every order given and obeyed was carving out the person I was meant to be. Someone stronger than their laughter, someone braver than their rejection. One night, lying in my rack after another grueling day, I whispered to myself, "They don't get to define me. Not anymore." It wasn't loud. It wasn't defiant. It was steady. A promise. Because here's the truth I finally understood. Family can give you life, but they don't get to take it away. Their words can bruise you, but only if you let them. And me? I was done letting them. The woman who once sat silent at the dinner table was gone. In her place stood someone unshakable, someone ready for the storms still to come. I thought I had gotten used to the way my father treated me. His cutting remarks, his smug little smirks when people laughed at my expense. It was all familiar. But nothing prepared me for the way he turned the knife that night. It was a family dinner, meant to celebrate my brother and his wife moving into their new home. Everyone was there. Cousins, uncles, aunts. The wine was flowing, the table was buzzing with chatter. I had just come back from a long deployment overseas, but no one asked about it. No one cared. They only wanted to hear about my brother's new job at a finance firm, his wife's baby plans, the real achievements of the family. I tried to stay quiet, focusing on my plate, when my father suddenly stood up with his glass. He tapped it lightly, silencing the room. His eyes, cold and gleaming, landed on me. "Let's raise a toast," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "To my son, the pride of this family, and to my daughter." He paused for effect, letting everyone's eyes swing toward me, who somehow still manages to find ways to embarrass us. Laughter exploded around the table. My uncle chuckled, my cousins smirked, even my own mother pressed her lips together as if fighting not to laugh. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I forced myself to sit still. My fork trembled in my hand. Inside, I wanted to scream. I wanted to slam my fist on the table and shout, "Do you even know what I've done? Do you know how many soldiers came home alive because I refused to give up? Do you know how many times I've stood on battlefields you couldn't even picture in your nightmares?" But I didn't say any of that. I stayed silent because I knew the truth. None of them wanted to hear it. They had already decided who I was. The screw-up, the disappointment, the one who never fit into their perfect image of family success. Then my father twisted it further. He leaned closer to the guests and added, "Can you imagine? She spent all these years in uniform, and what does she have to show for it? Nothing. No family, no children, no real career, just medals." He spat the word as if it were dirt. My chest tightened. Those medals weren't just things. They were blood, sweat, and the weight of lives saved. They were the silent tears of nights I spent wondering if I'd see tomorrow. They were the proof of everything I'd given while he sat in comfort, mocking me. My brother lifted his glass and said with a grin, "Don't be too hard on her, Dad. Some people just aren't meant to be winners." That broke me. For a second, my vision blurred. My own brother, the one I had sent money to when he was struggling, the one I had defended when others doubted him, he was laughing at me with them. I put my glass down and excused myself from the table. My legs shook as I walked out, but I refused to let them see me cry. Outside, the night air hit my face, cool and sharp, and I finally let the tears come. Standing under the streetlight, I whispered to myself, one day they'll choke on their own words. And in that moment, something hardened inside me. I realized my family wasn't just indifferent, they were enemies of my spirit. And I knew that if I wanted justice, I couldn't just survive their ridicule. I had to rise so high above it that their mockery would collapse under the weight of my truth. The betrayal that night didn't just cut me, it carved a vow into my bones. They thought they could laugh me into silence, but silence was over. I should have left right then, walked away and never looked back. But something inside me snapped that night. I was tired of swallowing my pain, tired of letting them laugh at me like I was nothing. So instead of heading home, I turned back and walked into the dining room. The laughter died the moment I stepped inside. My father smirked, still standing with his glass. "Well," he drawled, "look who decided to come back. Thought you'd gone off to sulk." I looked him dead in the eye. My voice was steady, sharper than I expected. "You think this is funny, mocking me in front of everyone?" He chuckled, raising his glass again. "Natalie, you've always been too sensitive. It's just a joke. Everyone knows you're different." He dragged out the word like it was poison. "A joke?" I repeated. My hands clenched at my sides. When I was dragging soldiers out of burning vehicles, was that a joke? When I stood in the desert under fire, making calls that saved lives, was that a joke too? My brother leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Here we go again. The war stories. Nat, nobody cares. You're not special, you're just obsessed with proving yourself." The room went silent. My cousins shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between us. My mother lowered her gaze, fiddling with her napkin like a child avoiding punishment. I took a deep breath. My voice dropped, calm but heavy. "You sit here laughing at me. But the truth is, none of you could survive one day of what I've lived through. None of you would even dare." My father's face darkened. His smile faded into a sneer. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. You think wearing a uniform makes you better than this family? You think those medals mean something to us?" "They should," I shot back. "Because every ribbon, every stripe, came with a price you'll never understand. And while you sit here bragging about jobs and houses, I've been fighting for a country you take for granted." Someone at the far end of the table coughed. My uncle muttered, "She's got a point." But my father slammed his glass down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Enough. You will not embarrass me in my own house. You are nothing but a disappointment, Natalie. Always have been, always will be." The words hit like a punch to the gut. But instead of breaking, something inside me rose higher. I stood straighter, shoulders squared like I was back on the field. I leaned forward, my voice low but cutting. "You call me a disappointment? The U.S. Navy doesn't think so. The soldiers whose lives I saved don't think so. The flag I fought under doesn't think so. And one day the world won't think so either." For the first time, I saw hesitation flicker in his eyes. Just a flash. But it was there. Uncertainty. Maybe even fear. I let the silence hang for a moment, then straightened my jacket and stepped back. "Enjoy your dinner," I said coldly. "One day you'll remember this moment, and you'll regret every word." I turned and walked out, my heels striking the floor like gunfire. Behind me, the room buzzed with whispers, but no one stopped me. Not even my mother. Outside, the night air felt different. Colder. Clearer. I realized something important. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their laughter to stop. What I needed was to rise so far above them that their cruelty turned into silence, swallowed by the weight of who I truly was. And in that moment, I promised myself I wasn't going to let their betrayal define me. I was going to make sure the world saw the real Natalie Carter. And when it did, my family would have no choice but to choke on the truth. When I stepped out into the night, the cold air hit my face like a slap. I kept walking, but my chest felt heavy, like I was carrying the weight of an entire war again. For years, I thought I'd gotten used to their words, their little smirks, the way my father's voice cut through me, sharper than any bullet. But that night, it sank deeper. I sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from anger. The kind of anger that doesn't burn loud. It burns quiet, deep. The kind that changes you. My phone buzzed. A text lit up the screen. It was from my mother. "Please don't make things harder. Just let it go, he didn't mean it." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in the empty car. He didn't mean it. He'd been saying the same things my entire life. He meant every word. What hurt more was that she always asked me to let it go. Never him. Always me. I typed back, my fingers moving before my mind could stop them. He meant it, and you know it. Then I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. For a long moment, I just sat there, watching my breath fog up the glass. Memories kept flashing in my mind. Me at 16, standing at the dinner table while Dad mocked me for being too weak to carry on the Carter name. Me at 22, heading off to training with no goodbye from him. Just silence. Me at 30, on deployment, writing letters home that never got answered. Every memory had the same soundtrack. His voice telling me I wasn't enough. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and whispered into the darkness, "Why do I still care? Why do I still want him to see me?" But deep down, I knew the answer. Every child wants their parents' approval, no matter how old they are, no matter how many battles they fought. And I was no different. I turned on the engine, but I didn't drive home. Instead, I parked at the overlook just outside town, where the city lights looked small beneath the night sky. I sat there for hours, thinking, remembering, feeling the ache of everything I had carried in silence. It was in that silence that something shifted. For the first time, I realized their voices didn't define me. Their laughter, their mockery. It had power only because I gave it power. And maybe it was time to take that back. Still, a part of me broke that night. A daughter inside me, the one who wanted to be loved unconditionally, finally accepted that it wasn't going to happen. My father wasn't going to wake up one day and see me differently. My mother wasn't going to defend me. My brother wasn't going to respect me. That truth hurt more than any battlefield scar. As the night stretched on, I whispered to myself, "All right, if they don't see me, the world will." In that moment, I knew. I would rise not to win their love, but to prove that their rejection had no power over me. And one day, when the world knew my name, their silence would speak louder than all their laughter combined. The next morning, I still felt the weight of the night before pressing on me. My eyes were swollen from lack of sleep, but my posture remained sharp. Years in uniform trained me never to slouch, no matter how heavy the burden. I thought I'd go through the motions quietly, just another day of pretending everything was fine. But life has a way of cracking silence in the most unexpected moments. I was at the coffee shop near base, trying to drown my thoughts in a bitter black roast, when I heard someone call my name. "Commander Carter?" I turned, confused. A man in civilian clothes stood there, though everything about him, his bearing, the way his eyes scanned the room, screamed military. I set my cup down. "Yes?" He extended his hand. "Colonel Adams, Pentagon liaison. I wanted to thank you in person. Your name came up yesterday during the debrief on Operation Sentinel. You saved a unit of ours from walking into an ambush. Without your call, we would have lost 12 soldiers." The words stunned me. That operation had been years ago, one of the many missions I buried deep because it carried too many memories. Yet here he was, standing in front of me, his eyes steady with gratitude. For a moment, my throat tightened. I thought of the night before, my father's laughter echoing, the word screw up cutting me open. Now here was a stranger, no, a fellow soldier, telling me the exact opposite. I shook his hand firmly. I just did my job, Colonel. He smiled faintly. You did more than that. Some of those men are alive today because of you. One of them happens to be my nephew. So, on behalf of my family, thank you. The weight of his words hit me harder than I expected. Family. His family thanked me. My own family mocked me. The irony was so sharp it nearly made me laugh. Colonel Adams glanced around the cafe, then leaned in slightly. Between us, there's talk of a commendation being revisited. Higher-ups are reconsidering some of the overlooked recommendations. Your name's on the list. I froze. A commendation. Recognition not from the people who laughed at me my entire life, but from the very institution I bled for. A system that, flawed as it was, still had moments of fairness. Why now? I asked softly. He shrugged. Sometimes the truth takes time to surface. Sometimes it takes the right people to speak up. Either way, it finds its way through. He gave me one last nod and left, his words hanging in the air like a lifeline I hadn't realized I needed. I sat back, gripping my cup so tightly my knuckles turned white. The world outside the cafe moved like normal. Cars passing, people hurrying to work, a kid laughing at a spilled muffin. But inside me, something shifted again. For years, my family's voice was the loudest in my head. Their ridicule, their dismissal, their silence. But now another voice broke through. Clear, undeniable recognition from someone who had no reason to flatter me. I whispered into my coffee, almost like a vow. If they won't see me, others will. And maybe that's enough. Later that evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I replayed the conversation. My father's face flashed in my mind, his smirk as he called me a screw-up. And then I imagined his face if he ever heard that his so-called failure of a daughter was under review for a commendation. The thought didn't bring me joy. Not yet. But it gave me something else. Fuel. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't break. I started writing. Pages and pages of everything I'd been through, the missions, the sacrifices, the scars no one at home wanted to hear about. For the first time, I wasn't writing to them. I was writing for me. And maybe one day, for the world. Because if my family's silence was the wound, then outside recognition would be the salve. And I promised myself, I would not let their laughter be the final word. The day of the ceremony arrived, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the forgotten daughter sitting in the corner of a family event. I wasn't the joke at someone else's toast. I stood in full dress uniform, the weight of my medals across my chest, and the world, finally, wasn't laughing at me. They were waiting for me to speak. The auditorium was filled to the brim. Military leaders, senators, journalists, and young cadets who looked at me as if I were living proof that hard battles, on the field and inside families, could be won. The air was thick with anticipation, and as my name was announced, I heard it echo in a way I'd never heard before. Admiral Natalie Carter. For a moment, I almost couldn't move. That word, Admiral, felt like it lifted me off the ground. I thought about the nights in Afghanistan when I had only the stars above me to remind me I wasn't completely alone. I thought about the endless drills, the pain of injuries, the whispers of doubt in my own head every time I heard Dad's voice sneer, "You'll never be anything." And now, that same name he mocked was being spoken with honor, with respect, with pride. As I walked onto the stage, the applause hit me like a wave. I could see people rise to their feet, clapping until their hands were red. Some even saluted as I passed. My chest tightened, but not from nerves, from something deeper, a release of every wound I had carried. I approached the podium. My voice shook at first, but then steadied. Years ago, someone told me I was the biggest screw-up in the family. I let the words hang there, watching a few faces in the crowd shift uncomfortably. For a long time, I believed them. But the battlefield has a way of teaching you truths louder than any insult. The room was silent, every eye locked on me. I stand here today not as the daughter who failed. I stand here as the Admiral who led her people home. I stand here because I never gave up on myself, even when the people closest to me did. The applause erupted again, but this time it wasn't just noise. It was vindication. It was proof that my story didn't end with humiliation at a wedding toast. And then I saw him, my father, sitting in the very back row. For once, he wasn't the loudest man in the room. He wasn't raising a glass, wasn't leading the laughter. He was small, silent, his face pale as if the truth had finally cornered him. His glass had been replaced by folded hands, his smirk by something he couldn't cover up. Shame. Our eyes met for a second. I expected rage to rise in me, but instead there was only a steady calm. The kind of calm that comes when the storm has finally passed. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to point him out. The world already knew the truth, and so did he. The commander-in-chief stepped forward and pinned the final insignia on my uniform. The 4 stars gleamed under the lights. My shoulders felt heavy with their weight, but my heart had never been lighter. "Admiral Carter," the commander said, loud enough for every soul in that hall to hear. "You've not only led with courage, but you've redefined what resilience looks like. Today, this nation honors you." I saluted sharply, and in that crisp movement, every wound my family had left on me seemed to seal. The audience rose again, and I saw cadets in the front row wiping tears. When I stepped back to the podium for my closing words, I let myself breathe in the moment. I want every person here, especially the ones who've been told they're not enough, to know this. You are not the names they called you. You are the battles you fought, the courage you carried, and the victories no one can take away from you. Stand tall. Even when no one claps for you, one day they will. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Cameras flashed, flags waved, and the sound of thousands of hands coming together drowned out every memory of being laughed at, ignored, or diminished. In that moment, I wasn't just Natalie Carter, the so-called screw-up. I was Admiral Carter, standing tall before a nation that finally saw me for who I was. And no amount of mockery could ever take that away. As the ceremony ended, I was surrounded by salutes, handshakes, and the flashing lights of cameras. Reporters shouted questions, young officers leaned in for pictures, and even hardened generals clasped my shoulder with respect. For once, I didn't feel like I was fighting for a seat at the table. I was the table. But in the midst of the celebration, I caught sight of him again. My father slipping quietly toward the exit. His steps were hurried, almost frantic, as though the air inside the hall was suffocating him. I excused myself from the crowd and followed at a distance, not out of anger, but out of something else. Closure. He stopped in a quiet corner of the lobby, away from the cameras. When I approached, he flinched like he'd been caught. His face, once always so red with pride or drink, was pale. He looked older than I remembered, smaller too, like the years of ridicule he had thrown at me had finally curled back into his own bones. "Dad," I said, my voice steady. He looked at me, then away. For the first time in my life, he didn't have a joke, a jab, or a smirk ready. Just silence. "You called me the family screw-up," I continued. "At every birthday, every holiday, every chance you got. You made sure I knew I wasn't good enough." His lips trembled. I was just trying to make you tough, Natalie." "Tough?" I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. "You didn't make me tough, Dad. War made me tough. Losing soldiers under my command made me tough. Carrying the weight of decisions you couldn't even imagine. That's what made me tough. All you did was make sure I never had a family to come home to." He reached for words, fumbling, but none came. And in that silence, I realized something. The man who once controlled the entire room with his booming voice had nothing left. His power had drained out the moment the world stopped laughing with him. "Do you know what they call me now?" I asked quietly. He shook his head. "Admiral Carter," I said, the words sharp but calm. "And today, the Commander-in-Chief himself said I've redefined resilience. The same daughter you mocked is the one your country salutes." Tears welled in his eyes, though he tried to blink them away. I didn't know you'd become this." "That's the point, Dad. You never saw me. Not once." The weight of my words seemed to crush him. His shoulders slumped, his gaze fell to the floor, and for the first time, I saw my father not as the towering critic of my childhood, but as a small man drowning in the wreckage of his own choices. And here was the truth. I didn't need him to apologize anymore. The audience inside, the medals on my chest, the cadets who looked up to me, that was my validation. His downfall wasn't my doing. It was his own blindness, his own refusal to see me, to believe in me. Reporters soon found us, swarming with cameras and microphones. One called out, "Admiral Carter, is this your father?" My father froze. For years, he had loved being the center of attention, but not now. Not when the spotlight exposed his silence. He stammered, "Yes, I'm her father." The reporter smiled, expecting a heartwarming reunion story. But I looked straight into the cameras and said, "This is the man who told me I would never be anything. Today, I stand here as Admiral, not because of him, but in spite of him." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father's face crumbled, his cheeks flushing with humiliation. He tried to step forward, maybe to defend himself, but the moment had already passed. The world had heard, and no amount of excuses could undo decades of mockery. I turned back to him one last time. "I don't hate you, Dad, but I won't carry your voice in my head anymore. From now on, the only voices I hear are the ones that believe in me." I left him standing there, a broken man in the shadow of a daughter he never thought would rise. Back inside, the music swelled, the celebration continued, and the people I had fought beside, my true family, welcomed me back into the light. My father had always believed that mocking me gave him power, but in the end, it stripped him of everything. The world saw the truth that day. Natalie Carter, once the family screw-up, was the admiral the nation honored. And my father? He was just the echo of a cruel joke that no one was laughing at anymore. And that's how the story ended. The girl they all mocked as the family screw-up became the admiral the nation salutes. My father? He faded into silence, carrying the weight of every cruel word he ever threw at me. I want you to remember this. The people who laugh at you today may not even have the courage to stand beside you tomorrow. Your worth is not defined by their ridicule. It's proven by the battles you fight and the victories you claim for yourself. If this story touched you, let me ask, what would you have done in my place? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to hear your perspective. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you'll never miss the next story. This is Hidden Family Revenge Stories, where we tell the best stories of pain, resilience, and ultimate triumph. Until next time. Stay strong and never let anyone write your ending for you.